Hello, this is Mr. Mitchell. Let's talk about the nervous system and the endocrine system. Here are questions for you. Nervous system. Our nervous system constantly processes stimuli and makes its response. Stimulus, response. Cells that carry these information, the stimuli and the response, are called neurons. Neurons is what they're called, and you can see that right here. These are cells that carry this information. Now, neurons are sometimes called simply nerve cells. The messages carried by nerve cells are called nerve impulses. Now, a neuron isn't your normal cell. And as you look at this cell and remember what you studied about cells, this doesn't look like the ones you studied. This has these branches coming out from it and one long branch at the end with a few sprouts down below it. These are what neurons look like. These thread-like extensions right here are called dendrites. I don't know if you can see it up there, but surely you can see it here. These are the dendrites. And there's an even longer thin extension called the axon. Now let me tell you what these do. Dendrites carry the impulses to the cell. So impulse is identified by the dendrite, and it carries that impulse to the cell. Let me go with a different color. It carries the impulse to the cell itself. There are lots of dendrites, but only one axon. So what's going to happen is the dendrite will carry it to the cell, and the cell will then carry it down the axon. And whenever it gets down here to the axon tips, it's going to transfer that information in a synapse. And I think I might be getting ahead of myself if I talk too much about the synapse right now. But anyway, if you have a bundle of dendrites and axons, if you have a bundle of these nerve cells, then it's called a nerve. So if you say, oh, I'm having a pinched nerve, that's a bundle of these, because these are going to be incredibly small. So whenever we refer to nerve, we're referring to more than just one of these. Looking back in my notes, dendrites and axons are sometimes called nerve fibers. Just kind of let you know that that might be a term you would see somewhere. Okay, these are called neurons again. So there are three types of neurons, and these are kind of simple. The sensory neuron picks up the stimuli impulse. So if these pick up the impulses from their dendrites, then it's going to be a sensory neuron. You've got these interneurons, a lot of interneurons in the brain, by the way. They carry the impulse to other neurons. So this neuron right here, the impulse would go in it, down the axon, and probably to another neuron, which could end up being an interneuron. Interneurons are kind of the in between the stimulus and the response. So the sensory neurons receive the stimulus or the stimuli, and of course it goes through an interneuron, and the motor neurons are the ones that are going to have the response. It sends the impulse to the muscle or to the gland for the response. Now every day we have billions of nerve impulses. This is not just something that happens whenever a fly lands on your arm and you swat at it. This is every day. Many of them you don't even pay any attention to. It's just so commonplace. Now the impulses are chemical, or they could be electrical. Now I'm not saying like you're plugged into a socket or anything, but I am saying that you have ions that will have a positive or negative charge that actually carry this information, that is actually what flows from one thing to the next. I know that's kind of a heady concept, but that's something that scientists think is really happening here. These nerve impulses can travel as fast as 120 meters per second. That's over a football field in a second. Oh, I'm sorry. That's yards. But meters are longer than yards. So yes, about nearly a football field and a quarter per second. The junction where one neuron transfers an impulse to another neuron is called the synapse. Let me get to pictures of a synapse. Here we have synapse. At the synapse, there is a gap between the axon tip and the dendrites of another neuron. Let's say we have here is one neuron, dendrites here, middle of the cell here, axon here. It's going to be in a bundle with others, so it's going to transfer information very quickly. But notice there is a little bit of space between one neuron and the other. It doesn't seem like there is, but there's a little bit of space. Now, scientists think that in this space is the axon tips release a chemical, that they release a chemical that ends up sending that information to the next one. It's got to be quick. I mean, this is what happens. Here's another example of it. You can see these right here where you get the synapses, and I don't know if you can tell very well, but they just almost touch, but they don't. I'm not quite sure exactly what the relevance of that is, but that's what scientists think is going on. The central nervous system is the control center of the body. And the central nervous system is abbreviated CNS here. It is the brain and the spinal cord. You know, the cord that goes straight up and down your back and connects to the brain. The spinal cord is actually enveloped by your spine, and you can see kind of a cross section of these vertebrae, and yes, that is the spinal cord that fits snugly right down into it. And you can see these things that are coming out from it. We'll talk about that very shortly. But anyway, there's more to this picture than just the central nervous system. All this part in green is the peripheral nervous system. And of course, they're all connected. Messages go from peripheral nervous system to the brain, back down the spinal cord, back to the peripheral nervous system in those different kinds of neutrons that we were talking about. The brain has 100 billion interneurons. Remember, the interneurons transfer from stimuli to response, so that's a whole lot of neurons there. These are very, very small. A network of nerves shoot out from the brain and the spinal cord. From the brain, you have 12 nerve pairs that shoot out, and from the spinal cord, you have 31 pair that shoot out, pair of nerves. And that's what these are right here. These are where the nerves shoot out, and you can probably see, like along this spinal cord, you have a pair, for example, right here. Right here you have one green thing shooting out here and one green thing shooting out another on the other side. That's one of those 31 pair that shoot out from the spinal cord. And of course, you hit a stimuli on one of these, and it's going to run into the spinal cord from there. I mean, that's just the route, the highway in which it takes. There are some reflex actions where the peripheral nerves don't even go to the brain. Say you get some kind of hot something that touches you right here under the arm. It sends the message to the spinal cord, and the spinal cord actually is able to send a response back. And it's a reflex. It just saves time going all the way to the brain and all the way back, which really, it's not going to take that long anyway, but that actually happens. It just has a quick response because of reflexes, which is a good safety thing that your body just happens to have. Okay, so that is about the nervous system. Let's talk about the endocrine system. The endocrine system produces chemicals that control many of the body's daily activities, and it regulates long-term changes such as growth. So let's talk a little bit more about this system where it has so many chemicals. This system is made up of glands. Now you've heard of glands. There are lots of glands in the body. Now the endocrine system is made up of glands, and the gland is an organ that produces or releases a chemical. And there are lots of different glands over here, and we'll talk about some of them. These glands produce and release directly into the bloodstream. So say you have this adrenal gland right here. I don't know if you can see it as well, but this adrenal gland doesn't have to go through a network of stuff. It ends up sending things straight out into the bloodstream. And what it sends out is, you guessed it, hormones. That's what it's called. What glands release are called hormones. This system is made up of glands, organs that produce or release a chemical. Hey, I think I said that earlier, my bad. They produce directly into the bloodstream, and of course the chemical product is called hormones. Hormones are interesting because once it gets to the bloodstream, you think those hormones would affect every cell, but it doesn't. It doesn't even affect most of the cells that it goes past. There are target cells that these hormones are specifically designed to fit in. So for example, the adrenal gland is going to produce adrenaline, and it will make your heart race faster. So you do have target cells in the heart that those hormones hook up with and produce the response that the body is supposed to have. So they kind of fit together like a lock and a key. Now there is something called a hypothalamus. I hope this is big enough for you to see how it's spelled. But the hypothalamus is located in the brain, as you can see from this diagram. It is the link between the brain and all of these glands. So let me just kind of briefly go over some of these glands. You have the pituitary gland. I don't think it's clear enough for you to see all of them, but the pituitary gland is in charge of growth and blood pressure. The thyroid, which I believe is right here, which is in charge of release of energy from food molecules. Right below it is the parathyroid gland. These regulate the amount of calcium in the blood. You can kind of see the nature of what these hormones regulate. It's not all feeling crazy and feeling different than you did like you associate with all hormone talk. Pancreas, where is that? Right here. We talked about the pancreas earlier. It is in charge of things like insulin and glucose in addition to what we talked about it in the digestive system. You have the ovaries in women, you have the testes in men. They are controlled there by the hypothalamus, and they're part of the endocrine system. The thymus, right here near the heart, helps the immune system. And the adrenal gland, the emergency responses where you'd have adrenaline, but adrenaline also controls the amount of salt in the kidneys and the amount of sugar in the blood. Well, I hope you've learned a little bit about the endocrine system and about the nervous system.